What range of exercises can help elevate your lat development to new heights? If you've ever plunged into the depth of lat training info on the internet, conflicting info exists. The validity of lat pulldowns and barbell rows for lat hypertrophy has been questioned. It's also been said free weight pullovers aren't even a lat exercise. In this video, we're going to roll through the confusion and arrive at a clearer landscape of what the current scientific literature informs us about maximizing lat hypertrophy. Welcome to the House of Hypertrophy. Before commencing our analysis, it is crucial to understand that the lats, which cover a wide area across the back, have subdivisions. A 2013 Canadian analysis divided the lats into two regions, an upper thoracic region and a lower lumbar pelvis costal region. An older 1998 Australian analysis also noted the upper thoracic region, but divided the lower region into transitional, raphe, iliac, and costal fibers. Finally, a 2007 analysis also from Australia considered the lats to have 6 regions, predominantly based on the line of actions of the muscle tissue. The findings of this same paper indicate that the central nervous system can somewhat activate certain regions more than other regions depending on the movement. This tells us that different exercises may grow certain regions of the lats slightly more. This may come as a surprise to some, but the notion that certain parts of a muscle may grow more than other parts isn't a myth. The scientific research verifies this phenomenon, called regional hypertrophy, exists. As just one example, we've previously seen at the House of Hypertrophy that both barbell squats and hip thrusts predominantly grow the lower regions of the gluteus maximus more than the middle and upper regions. Vertical pulls, including pull-ups and lat pull-downs, are one type of compound exercise. Many people have some kind of vertical pull in their training program. Vertical pulls can be performed with different grip widths, and this will likely influence lat hypertrophy in different ways. Firstly, vertical pulls involve elbow flexion, so we'll train the elbow flexors. Moreover, vertical pulls also tend to involve scapular depression and/or downward rotation, and since the majority of people's lats attach to the scapula, the muscle may assist in these motions. Nonetheless, if you're performing vertical pulls with a grip closer to being narrower, such as close grip pull-ups and close grip lat pull-downs, you're predominantly performing shoulder extension. Underhand vertical pulls, such as chin-ups and underhand lat pull-downs, predominantly tend to involve shoulder extension too. Alongside the lats, the teres major, teres minor, and rear delts are the main muscles that can pull on the upper arm bone to enforce shoulder extension. Which of these muscles experience the best stimulus? A classic analysis from the USA assists us. It established throughout shoulder extension that both the teres major and lats possess the largest leverage, whereas the rear delts and teres minor leverages were lower. In case you're unaware, leverage refers to a muscle's moment arm, which is the perpendicular distance between its line of force and the center of the joint it moves. The longer the moment arm, the greater the leverage and ability of the muscle to move the joint. Multiple papers suggest that leverage plays an important part in how the central nervous system decides what muscles to recruit in a movement. Closer grip vertical pulls tend to be most challenging near that contracted position, so the rear delts are going to be involved relatively well, but we're still getting an excellent teres major and lat stimulus. Are we potentially biasing a particular region of the lats with these closer grips? This 2008 analysis from Australia established across shoulder extension, the upper region had greater leverage compared to the middle and lower regions, particularly at the lower shoulder angles, which is where vertical pulls are quite challenging. Indeed, recall we mentioned a 2007 Australian paper that split the lats into 6 regions. This paper recorded the electrical activity of the 6 regions during an isometric shoulder extension contraction through surface electromyography, held at around 0 degrees, which is where vertical pulls are challenging. SEMG is far from perfect, as I've discussed multiple times previously, but the usage of isometric contractions in this case likely enhances its reliability. It was found that upper lat regions tended to display higher activity compared to the other regions. Thus, based on the leverage and activity data, it seems closer grip vertical pulls are going to be particularly effective for targeting the upper region. This isn't to be mistaken for saying the middle and lower regions aren't targeted whatsoever. They certainly will be involved. It's just that we're probably biasing the upper portion to some degree. What about differences between underhand vertical pulls and overhand or neutral grip closer grip vertical pulls? Well-controlled research unsurprisingly indicates that biceps are involved more with an underhand grip. Does this mean lat activity is reduced? I'm only aware of this 2002 analysis out of the USA that found comparable lat activity between close grip pull-downs performed with a neutral grip and underhand lat pull-downs. So, in the absence of other data, this finding may preliminarily indicate that underhand grip does not reduce lat involvement. Wider grip vertical pulls, such as wide grip pull-ups and lat pull-downs, likely train the lats in a slightly different way. As you move from a closer to wider grip, you transition to performing shoulder adduction. Alongside the lats, the teres major, middle and lower pectoralis major, and rear delts are the main muscles that can pull on the upper arm bone to enforce shoulder adduction. Which of these muscles experience the best stimulus? On the basis of this 2008 Australian analysis, we can see the rear delt's leverage rapidly drops off, and throughout the angles that are most challenging in a wide grip vertical pull, the rear delts do not have much leverage. Conversely, all the other muscles, the teres major, all three lat regions, and the middle and lower pectoralis major have great leverage throughout the range of motion. Focusing on the lat regions, we can see that the middle and lower regions have slightly more leverage compared to the upper region. Indeed, the previously mentioned 2007 Australian paper that split the lats into 6 regions established during an isometric shoulder adduction contraction, the lower regions tended to display greater activity. Granted, these isometric contractions were held at 20 degrees of abduction, an angle not reached with wider grip vertical pulls. But based on the leverage data, I'm assuming this lower region bias still exists throughout the range of motion attained in wider grip vertical pulls. Therefore, it seems wider grip vertical pulls will bias the middle and lower regions. We just saw this graph from the 2008 Australian paper, indicating the middle and lower lat regions have slightly more leverage than the upper region. But some of you may be drawn to another part of this graph, the fact the middle and lower pecs have great leverage. You may be surprised at this. After all, vertical pulls are never recommended as a great chest builder, so what's going on? To perform vertical pulls as close to pure shoulder adduction, what I describe as a very wide grip is needed. Interestingly, I stumbled across this Reddit user reporting chest soreness after using a wide grip on pull-ups with their elbows all the way out to the side. Most people rarely do this. Instead, a medium or slightly wider grip is more common. These involve a mixture of shoulder adduction and extension, presumably lowering pectoralis major contribution. It's also plausible medium grip width vertical pulls do well to target all regions of the lats fairly well. So what does this mean for you? In due time, we'll provide training recommendations. But first, let's deconstruct the effectiveness of rows for building the lats. Horizontal pulls, including barbell rows, dumbbell rows, seated rows, and inverted rows, are another type of compound exercise. Many people have at least one kind of horizontal pull in their training program. As was the case with vertical pulls, the grip width is a notable factor. With a grip closer to narrower, such as done with close grip barbell rows, seated rows, and inverted rows, shoulder extension occurs. Shoulder extension also occurs with one-sided rowing exercises that keep the elbow to the side of the body. Horizontal pulls tend to be most challenging near that contracted position, and recall the upper lats possess more leverage and display greater activity around here. Therefore, similar to closer grip vertical pulls, closer grip horizontal pulls may bias the upper lat region. Yet, there are at least 3 distinctions between closer grip horizontal and vertical pulls: the overall range of motion, the lat length obtained, and the degree of shoulder hyperextension and scapular retraction. Could any of them influence lat hypertrophy? Starting with range of motion, closer grip vertical pulls move the shoulder joint from around 170 to 0 degrees. Horizontal pulls move the shoulder joint from approximately 75 to 0 degrees, perhaps even entering negative degrees, that is, shoulder hyperextension, depending on the execution. Your default assumption might be the greater range of motion with closer grip vertical pulls means they're more effective for building lats, but I would argue this probably isn't true. In multiple prior videos, I've referenced emerging research suggesting larger ranges of motions are not necessarily better. This study found partial leg extensions at a lengthened muscle position built the quads overall better than a full range of motion. Another paper found partial calf presses at the lengthened position grew the gastrocnemius more than using a full range of motion. Finally, the results of a study soon to be published indicate lengthened partial hip extensions produced overall more hypertrophy versus a full range of motion. It's unclear how far this logic extends. So for now, I'm not confident in saying everyone must perform vertical and horizontal pulls with a lengthened partial range of motion. At the very least, this data just demonstrates larger ranges of motions aren't always better. What about the fact vertical pulls attain a greater stretch of the lats? Could this not mean they're better than horizontal pulls for building the lats? Although the lats are lengthened more with closer grip vertical pulls, a key consideration is the exercise is not challenging near the most stretched position. Preliminary data indicates if that more lengthened position does not coincide with being challenging, it might not be more effective. For example, this study from Japan compared partial range of motion skull crushers to full range of motion skull crushers. Full range of motion skull crushers involve lengthening the triceps more, but it does not coincide with it being very challenging. Rather, skull crushers are most challenging when the forearm is parallel to the floor. The researchers found those partial skull crushers grew the triceps more. A more recent study compared incline curls to preacher curls. Incline curls attain a great stretch of the biceps, but are more challenging at the mid to contracted position. The results indicate preacher curls grew the elbow flexors more. Finally, what about the fact horizontal pulls can involve bringing the arm behind the body, hyperextension, and notable scapular retraction can occur. Positioning your arm behind you and retracting your scapula highly involves the upper back muscle area, but I'm skeptical this negatively interferes with the lat stimulus across the rest of the range of motion. Muscle activity isn't always mutually exclusive. Accordingly, despite the distinctions, I think closer grip vertical and horizontal pulls may comparably develop the lats. As you move to performing wider grip horizontal pulls, such as wide grip barbell rows, seated rows, and inverted rows, you transition to performing shoulder horizontal extension. One-sided rows performed with the elbows flared away from the body also involve shoulder horizontal extension. Are these more effective for developing the lats? Based off the 1997 Australian analysis, we can see throughout shoulder horizontal extension, the rear delts, infraspinatus, and supraspinatus possess the best leverage, while the lats have a lot lower leverage. As a result, we can confidently say that if the goal is to maximize lat engagement with horizontal pulls, closer grips maintaining the elbow to the body that necessitate shoulder extension best accomplish this. Thus far, we've discussed the potential effects of vertical and horizontal pulls for developing the lats, but we've yet to touch on the influence of modality, that is, does using a barbell, dumbbell, machine, or bodyweight exercise matter? For instance, although we know wider grip pull-ups and wider grip lat pull-downs predominantly involve shoulder adduction, could one not be better? Also, although we know barbell, machine, dumbbell, and bodyweight rows can involve shoulder extension, are any better? Most likely not. Modality largely has little influence on hypertrophy outcomes. This recent study involved comparing a free weight to machine program. Hypertrophy of the measured muscles was comparable between both, a finding supported by other papers. Another paper indicates push-ups produced comparable chest and triceps gains to barbell bench presses. That's not to say there is no difference whatsoever between the modalities. Finer differences exist. Pull-ups may engage the forearm somewhat more than lat pull-downs. One-arm rowing exercises involve a greater rotational component compared to two-arm variants. But in the precise context of developing the lats with all the aforementioned exercises, I can't see any strong reason to believe certain modalities are superior, except for one. That is, some have suggested since barbell rows involve loading the lower back, this means it is inferior for the lats. This 2009 analysis from Canada found lat activity was greater with inverted rows compared to barbell rows, while lower spinal erector activity was greater with barbell rows. Another 2005 analysis from Japan found lat activity was slightly greater with seated rows compared to barbell rows, while trap activity was greater with barbell rows. Truthfully, I'm unsure what to make of these findings. You may suggest barbell rows involve too much of a demand to stabilize the torso, creating higher activity in the lower spinal area and perhaps traps, to the extent lat involvement is reduced. But a counterpoint might be the findings are attributable to the multiple limitations of SEMG, and that although there's a demand to stabilize the torso with barbell rows, it ultimately should be limited by shoulder extension strength, and thus we should expect lat involvement to be similar between barbell rows and other rows. The only way to solve this is if we had research directly comparing lat hypertrophy between barbell rows and other rows. Since this currently does not exist, I'm just going to say it's fine to train with barbell rows if you desire. Other factors may influence your decision, of course. Perhaps you're training plenty of other exercises that train the spinal erectors, and you don't want any further stimulus from barbell rows. Thus, machine or bodyweight rowing variations are going to be a better option. So we know shoulder extension based compound exercises, closer grip vertical or horizontal pulls, that may bias the upper lat region can be complementary to shoulder adduction compound movements, that is wide grip vertical pulls, that bias the middle to lower regions. If you have at least one shoulder extension based compound exercise and one shoulder adduction exercise, I think there's an extremely high probability you'll see excellent lat hypertrophy over the long term. I think it's also possible that only training medium grip vertical pulls, since they might involve targeting all lat regions relatively well, will do an excellent job at developing the lats in the long term. It's not impossible to perform a program with a mixture of these either. But do you need an exercise that isolates the lats to ensure maximal development? Unfortunately, there isn't any directly related research, although I will say there's this fascinating study finding with a barbell bench press, not everyone experienced the same relative recruitment of the chest, triceps, and shoulders. What I mean is some may see their highest activity in the chest, while others may see their highest activity in the shoulders. If we extrapolate this data, it's possible someone experiences relatively lower stimulation of the lats from the exact same compound exercise compared to someone else. Here's my recommendation. If you're not overly concerned about getting every ounce of lost muscle mass from the lats, isolated lat exercises may not be essential, but if after a few months or even years of training your desired vertical and or horizontal pulls, you're not satisfied with your lat development, then it may be time to add in isolated exercises. If you're someone who wants to do everything in your power to squeeze out maximal lat hypertrophy, then including isolated lat training may be worthwhile. Of course, there's nothing absolute about what I just said. There are other scenarios in which you'd want to have isolated lat training. For example, if for whatever reason you don't want to perform vertical and or horizontal pulls, or you're performing them in a way suboptimally for the lats, such as only performing wider grip horizontal pulls which we know are likely not great for the lats, then having isolated lat training can be worthwhile. Another case is maybe you're someone who still isn't concerned with truly maximizing lat hypertrophy, but perhaps you just like some exercise variety and therefore desire to include isolated lat training. But what are the most favorable isolated lat exercises? Pullovers are an isolation exercise that can train the lats, and they can be performed with free weights, cables, or even machines. Recall earlier I stated that modality likely does not matter for lat hypertrophy with horizontal and vertical pulls. However, pullovers are a rarer case. There are actually some differences between the free weight, cable, and machine variations that may be important. Allow me to present the findings of two studies. At first, you may be confused as to why I'm detailing them, but it will make sense soon. Both papers had subjects perform maximal isometric shoulder extension contractions at different shoulder elevation angles. Both of them indicate the lats display their highest activity at lower shoulder elevation angles and incrementally display lower activity at higher shoulder elevation angles. In this event, the usage of isometric contractions likely enhances its reliability. These findings do make sense. As you elevate your arm and get closer to the overhead position, the lats are going to have progressively lower leverage. Here's the important point. Free weight pullovers are most challenging with the arms overhead, the point where the lats have their lowest activity. As a result, it's been speculated free weight pullovers are an ineffective lat exercise. In fact, at these higher shoulder elevation angles, the middle and lower pec regions likely have decent leverage. Indeed, a few SEMG studies report the pectoralis major middle and lower regions experience relatively greater activity compared to the lats during free weight pullovers. So does this research conclusively mean free weight pullovers aren't a great lat exercise? According to some on the internet, their answer is a resounding yes. But I am less certain because there are other aspects of the scientific literature we shouldn't ignore. The lats are stretched well in the overhead position. The rebuttal to this is, so what if the lats are stretched? The fact it's not going to be activated much renders this meaningless. However, it's worth understanding its leverage and activity are not going to be zero, it's just limited. But limited activity plus stretch might still produce a good stimulus for lat hypertrophy. Research on the back squat and glute max depicts this. Back squats are of course most challenging at the lower portion, and at these deeper angles of hip flexion, the gluteus maximus is stretched well, but it has much lower leverage, ability to produce force, and displays lower activity as measured through SEMG. Despite this, a paper out of Japan established deeper squats grew the gluteus maximus more effectively than 90-degree knee flexion squats. Another recent paper found back squats, mostly to parallel, produce similar upper, middle, and lower glute max hypertrophy to hip thrusts. Thus, stretch plus limited leverage and activity may still be a fine stimulus for hypertrophy, maybe suggesting free weight pullovers may still be effective for the lats. At the end of the day, if it's it's an exercise that interests you, feel free to try it out. From a regional perspective, the lower lats are probably going to have a bit more leverage versus the other regions at the overhead position, so pullovers might slightly bias this region. Cable pullovers involve a great stretch of the lats since they attain an overhead position comparable to free weight pullovers. Yet, compared to free weight pullovers, cables involve a greater active range of motion. The arms will go through lower elevation angles, which we know is where the lats have greater activity. Thus, actual electrical activity from the lats will likely be greater in the cable variation. Indeed, there was this 2022 SEMG analysis from Spain comparing barbell pullovers to cable pulldowns. Lat activity was greater with a cable movement. The cable pulldown isn't identical to a cable pullover, but the shoulder motion and resistance profile are similar enough. From a regional perspective, since cable pullovers involve getting the arms near the side, the upper region will certainly be involved well, but since the movement is most challenging at that mid position, the middle to lower lat regions might be potentially biased. For all these reasons, we may speculate cable pullovers to be a bit better than free weight pullovers. But understand this is hypothetical. You could say since free weight pullovers are most challenging at that very lengthened position, while cable pullovers are most challenging in the mid position, free weight pullovers have their edge. Yet, I'm unsure if this factor is enough to make it undeniably better than cable pullovers. Machine pullovers, assuming the machine sufficiently provides high resistance throughout the range of motion, are probably more favorable compared to free weight or cable pullovers. The high tension throughout the range of motion means that the lengthened position is challenging, and we have a potential slight lower lat region bias at this position, like free weight pullovers. But the fact we also have high tension at lower angles where the lats display greater electrical activity, and the portions where the upper region possesses greater leverage, means we get these benefits too. So if you wish to have a pullover in your program to best train the lats, go with the machine pullovers. Of course, this isn't an absolute recommendation. Your gym may not have this machine, if yours does, but the machine feels off, then go with either the free weight or cable variant. There is one more lat exercise worth dissecting, high rows, where you row with your arms starting at a slanted angle, so not quite fully overhead. This is a compound exercise as shoulder and elbow motion occurs, but it is a movement that can effectively target the lats nonetheless. Depending on the equipment and setup, you can train one arm at a time and bring your arm across your body to some degree. Doing so will result in you attaining a great stretch of the lats, since the lats wrap around the rib cage. If you have a machine that provides a solid challenge at the more lengthened position, perhaps one with a more even resistance profile, this will likely be excellent. You could make the case these high rows are slightly better than machine pullovers. We know machine pullovers achieve a great stretch of the lats, but this is at the overhead position where the lats display their lowest leverage and thus activity. Conversely, high rows involve comparatively lower arm elevation, so the lats are slightly better activated in this position, but we still have a great lat stretch thanks to bringing the arm slightly across. Now, whether this difference is enough to meaningfully impact lat hypertrophy in the long term is currently unknown. Ultimately, if you have access to both, feel free to go with your preference. It's not impossible for you to incorporate both of them into your program either. Some may be curious about the technique and execution of the aforementioned exercises and/or about precise details about programming for muscle hypertrophy. I'm glad to say our high-quality partner, the Alpha Progression app, can help you. Containing a massive exercise database with more than 550 exercises, video and text instructions come with each. There's an awesome custom workout generator that can tailor a program to your needs. Enter the equipment you have, how often and long you want to train for, and if you want to focus or neglect certain muscles. There are over a quadrillion input combinations on which your plan is based, and the training philosophy is derived from scientific literature. To top it all off, graphics unveil your long-term progression, such as your strength progression, workout consistency, set numbers performed, and circumference of body parts if you desire. The link in the comments and description lets you try out all these premium app features for free for 14 days. If you like it and choose to go beyond, the link also gives you 20% off a subscription. I sincerely believe the app is nothing short of exceptional. Both vertical and horizontal pulls can be highly effective for targeting the lats, except for wider grip horizontal pulls which better target the rear delts, infraspinatus and supraspinatus. Nonetheless, closer grip vertical and horizontal pulls will likely be highly effective for targeting the upper lat regions. Wider grip vertical pulls will likely be highly effective for targeting the lower lat regions. Medium grip vertical pulls potentially involve targeting all regions fairly well. If you're training some of these compound exercises, there's a high probability you'll see tremendous lat development over the long term. There are a variety of cases where you may wish to add in isolated lat training. Pullovers are a great isolation movement that effectively targets the lats. This is how I would rank the different modalities. High rows, performed with the arm slightly across the body to attain a great lat stretch, although actually a compound exercise, nonetheless effectively targets the lats, so is another option on the table. Remember to feel free to check out the Alpha Progression app, and/or feel free to check out our guides to developing the side and rear delts.